All right, let's talk about one of the most incredible stories in all of history. We're talking about a young king who, in just a little over a decade, decided he was going to conquer the entire known world. His name, of course, was Alexander, and what he did would literally change the course of civilization forever.
So picture this. The year is 334 BCE. The man who is about to take on the world's only superpower is just 20 years old. I mean, think about that for a second. At an age where most of us are just figuring things out, Alexander was launching one of the most ambitious military campaigns the world had ever seen.
And his target wasn't just some rival kingdom, no. He was aiming for the whole shebang, the colossal Persian Empire. This thing was a massive, incredibly wealthy superpower that stretched across 3 continents. For anyone looking on, this goal wasn't just audacious, it seemed downright impossible.
But here's the thing. Alexander wasn't starting from scratch. He inherited an absolute game-changing army and a ready-made invasion plan from his father, the brilliant and frankly ruthless King Philip II of Macedon. Philip had already done the hard work of uniting the bickering Greek city-states and was gearing up for the war with Persia himself.
And the secret weapon at the heart of this new Macedonian military machine, it was called the sarissa. Now this wasn't just a longer spear, it was a total game changer. Its insane length meant that Macedonian soldiers could hit and kill their enemies long before those enemies could even get close.
So here's how it worked. Soldiers would pack into this super dense formation called a phalanx. The first 5 ranks would lower their pikes, creating this horrifying, bristling wall of spear points moving towards you. It was basically an unstoppable human hedgehog, and there was nothing else like it in the world. But then, right on the verge of launching his great invasion, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. And, just like that, the whole plan was thrown into complete chaos. The fate of this massive undertaking suddenly fell onto the shoulders of his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander, though, he didn't even blink. After ruthlessly crushing rebellions and getting rid of any potential rivals back home, he immediately picked up right where his father left off and launched the invasion of Persia. And his campaign kicked off with just a stunning string of victories. At the Granicus River, he personally led a cavalry charge straight into the enemy lines. At Issus, he came face to face with the Persian king, Darius III himself, and made him run for his life. And then he did what everyone said was impossible. He laid siege to and conquered the island fortress of Tyre. In just 2 years, it was clear he was a military genius.
There's this great story that just perfectly sums up who he was. He comes across this impossibly complex knot, and there's a prophecy that says whoever can untie it will rule all of Asia. So what does Alexander do? He doesn't even try to untie it. He just pulls out his sword and hacks it in 2. That was Alexander in a nutshell. Bold, decisive, and he did not care about the rules.
So, with the western half of the Persian Empire under his belt, Alexander marched straight into its heartland. The stage was now set for one final, absolutely epic showdown with King Darius. The winner would take all.
At the massive battle of Gaugamela, Darius had picked the perfect spot, a wide, flat plain where he could use his gigantic army, which outnumbered Alexander's by at least 2 to 1. He had cavalry, scythed chariots, the works. Honestly, on paper, Alexander didn't have a prayer.
So what do? How do you possibly win when you're facing a force like that? Well, you don't play by their rules. You make them play by yours.
Alexander pulled off this brilliant, totally unorthodox move. He marched his army forward at an angle, moving out to the right. This totally confused the Persians, who sent their cavalry wide to try and stop him. But that was the trap. This movement opened up a tiny, temporary gap in the Persian center, and that was the exact moment Alexander was waiting for. He wheeled his best cavalry and charged like a thunderbolt right through that gap, straight for Darius.
And for the second time, Darius panicked. He turned and fled for his life. The second his troops saw their king abandon him, their morale just shattered. The whole army collapsed. And with that one single, brilliant charge, the Persian Empire was his. Alexander was now the king of kings.
But here's the crazy part. Conquering Persia, it wasn't enough. Alexander's ambition was just limitless. He felt his pull to march to what the Greeks thought was the literal edge of the world. But this relentless drive, it started to take a serious toll.
You see, his greatest victories on the battlefield were behind him, but his biggest challenges were now coming from within. The nonstop campaigning, the pressure of it all, his own personality started to change, and it began to cause some deep cracks in his army and his inner circle. He started acting more like a Persian king, which his Macedonian soldiers just couldn't stand. He grew paranoid and executed one of his best generals, a guy named Parmenion. Then, in a drunken rage, he actually killed his close friend Clitus, the man who had saved his life in his very first battle. The bonds that held his army together were starting to snap.
And the breaking point finally came in India. After 8 years of marching and fighting, thousands and thousands of miles from home, his army just stopped. They put their foot down. They'd heard stories of even bigger armies waiting for them, and they were just done. For the first and only time, Alexander's ambition was defeated. Not by an enemy army, but by his own exhausted men.
So, a heartbroken Alexander turned back. His conquest had reached its end, but his story was about to take its most tragic and final turn.
Shortly after he got back to Babylon, as he was planning his next campaign, Alexander got sick with a raging fever. And after days of agony, he died. He was only 32 years old. Just like that, the conqueror of the world was gone.
And since he hadn't named an heir, the massive empire he had built with his own two hands almost immediately started to crumble. His top generals, they're called the successors, literally tore it to pieces fighting each other for decades. It got so bad that even his own wife and young son were murdered in the chaos. His direct line was just wiped out. So, if his political empire was basically a catastrophic failure, what was his real legacy? Well, it turns out it was cultural. And the long-term impact of what he did was so much bigger than just borders on a map.
He kicked off a whole new era that we now call the Hellenistic Age. For the next 300 years, Greek culture, language, and ideas spread all across the lands he'd conquered. And this amazing fusion of East and West created a vibrant new world, transforming science, art, everything. That was his true, unfinished masterpiece. But his unbelievable story leaves us with one last nagging question. His body was put in this magnificent golden coffin and taken to the city he founded, Alexandria, in Egypt. But then, it vanished. To this day, nobody has ever found the tomb of Alexander the Great. It's one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, a final puzzle from a life that was larger than legend itself.